Right, ladies and gentlemen, so welcome to an unexpected OREF meeting, an extra one. We're delighted to have Dan and his team up from Great British Energy, and this was too good an opportunity to miss, to actually talk about a document I think is really important, the local power plan. So what we're going to do is a little bit of an introduction from Gareth about what's happening in Orkney as a whole, and then a bit of a discussion really about the plan, bit of a fireside chat but without the fire. And really, just, yeah, hopefully, if there's a fire, you know the drill. But really, it's important that we take the opportunity to really reflect on what's going on. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do this meeting is that so much has been happening in Orkney, and it's a really good chance for us to actually reflect on what's happening. And Dan was just saying, this was 2021, wasn't it? We actually stood in the street in London getting slightly pissed, and we've edited that bit out. Anyway, but it was about working out what we can about what's needed to happen with renewables as a whole, because at the time we were with Renewable UK. And I'd always said it'd be a good idea, come up to Orkney, come see what's going on. And I'm pleased to say that Dan's actually taken me out of his word and come up and brought everybody else up. Because the thing is, it's a place which is quite inspirational, and that was the word we were just talking about. So much has happened here. You know, roughly 1 in 10 of the people in Orkney are generating their own power. And out of curiosity, I'm going to do a quick straw poll here while we're at it. Can you see your hand up if you've got a heat pump?
Oh, can I take a photograph?
Oh, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Okay, so this is if you've got a heat pump. Okay, right. Hands down. Hands up if you've got an electric car. Okay, hands down. Hands up if you've got solar or wind. Okay, and hands up if you've got a battery. So, point is, we were saying earlier about we are your future. So it's about trying to make this real, because there's nothing worse than trying to fight the good fight, but not having the background story. So if we can give some background story to the guys, they can make a real difference on a wider scale. So that's really what this is about. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gareth, and then we'll see where we go.
Thanks, Neil. Great to see you, Dan. And what I thought I would do is just get there's just 5 slides or something like that to just set the scene, bring up some of the issues that we've discussed in OREF over the years, and maybe just give a reminder for us as an audience and a group of Orcadians about some of the issues that we face. It doesn't mean that we can't speak about other things. These are just prompts to stimulate a discussion. And after I finish in 5 minutes, we're then going to have the fireside chat, and it's open to the floor to take us forward. And Neil might give us some instructions at that point about how he wants the questions to be framed. But obviously there's a lot of people in the room and a lot of things to get through, which should be great. So this, I thought I had to start here. It's an old favorite OREF slide, really. It kind of reflects the energy system that we live in. Although it was for 2019, it still reflects where we are. And this key thing about Orkney is that we've managed to decarbonise our electricity, but we've still got 85% of the job to be done with the hydrocarbon part. And some of those issues might come up. Obviously, you saw a cohort here that have all of that electrical infrastructure, but actually we still have quite high carbon footprints because of all the hydrocarbons we're still using as well. And reflecting on what the last, OREF's been going 25 years, and very often it feels like a game of snakes and ladders. And snakes and ladders is a game of kind of risk. You've got reward and you've got jeopardy. And, you know, OREF has been through and celebrated some great wins where we've climbed ladders and achieved things. But we've also slid down some pretty horrible snakes at times where things haven't happened as we might want. And so with the levels of need that we've got for energy, we use a lot of energy. So we have that kind of capacity to maybe be at the front edge of energy transition. We've got brilliant resources. We've got an engaged community. We've got a highly progressive supply chain that can support that community. We've got a track record unparalleled of successful delivery across all parts of the energy system. we've got this diversity of energy situations. Because we're an archipelago, we're not just an island, we're islands within islands, and then islands within islands within islands. We have a lot of situations where energy is important, and we can think about that and deliver on that. And we're at the scale where, we talked about this, touched on this morning, we're at a scale where you can achieve and demonstrate early and at a modest investment, and then roll it out to a bigger scale after that. And on the issue side, we've had, in the old days, there were surcharges on the amount that we paid for power. We had a 2p surcharge on our domestic bills. That's actually been dealt with, but there's other issues in terms of affordability that I'll come on to. We've struggled with the level of connectivity. I was just talking to one of my Stromness neighbours earlier on about the line of excavation that's wending its way across the West Mainland countryside at the moment, which is the new cable going in. That's something that we campaigned for 23 years, and it's finally getting built, and hopefully what's being built will then be able to be used. But as we'll make it into, there's a lot of issues associated with that. Locational charging has been a big bugbear for us, and I think as a community we canvassed that that's been unfair. It's disadvantaged the rural and remoter parts of the country for decades. And we've been off the strategy map, often quite literally. The Orkney Shetland in the box at the side of the map, or not even on there. And we've had discussions with governments and agencies about that. We're exceptional, not average. That's one of the other things that we'll come on to. The policy instability has been worrisome, and I think looking forward, having got to this stage in our transition and looking at some of the policy that's being put around by some of the parties at a UK level in particular, there's concerns about where that may take us in the future. And we've had problems with our DNO that really hasn't focused on the issues that we have within Orkney. And then needing greater flexibility with regulations. Just talking, we may come into this, some of the things that people in the room have been campaigning for 10, 15 years, maybe just coming about in terms of allowing communities to trade energy within their own boundaries, which might be really exciting. So snakes and ladders is what it's been like. And I think, you can't go through a news cycle at the moment without hearing about the affordability of energy. And in preparations for down the team coming up, we prepared this, which just kind of shows why we have this issue. This looks at the unit cost of electricity, heating oil, petrol, and it shows that Orkney, which is the red arrow, we're at the upper end of that. I think we all know that. This is all our lived experience. When it comes to energy use, this is the amount of energy on average we use as a household. You can see our electricity use, our heating fuel use is at the extreme end. Our petrol, not quite at the extreme end, but it's still high. And obviously, we don't have access to cheap gas. That means that our total energy costs, compared to all the other local authorities in the country, is up here. We're not quite as high as the Isle of Scilly, but we're as high as everywhere else. And we share that with Shetland and the Western Isles. And then on the other side, we've got how much money we all have to pay for it. So this is where our household income comes on a UK scale. So we may not think of ourselves as poor and destitute, but the reality is we're not as well off as other places. And in terms of the cost of living, one of the things that helps there is that maybe our cost of living isn't quite as high, which might be quite surprising, but obviously it depends how you measure cost of living as well. But that's what the metrics are showing. So what that leaves is Orkney, in terms of the percentage of income that you have to your house that you spend on energy, on average in Orkney, the data says we're spending 26% of our household income on energy, on our petrol, on our electricity, and on our heating oil. And in terms of residual income, after you've paid for your other costs and your energy, on average in Orkney, we have £1,000 left a year to spend on other things. When you look at other parts of the UK, they have £50,000 left per household. Now, obviously, this is average. It doesn't reflect the full experience, but as we know, we have poverty in our islands. We've got households that are really struggling. Not everybody. And this is the map which shows the distribution of it. So I was sure that was going to come up in one way or another, and it's just to kind of be able to have some data to refer to. And what that means is when, like this week, we hear about the energy cap going up or going down, what we need to do in Orkney is basically double whatever number the BBC or ITV is telling us, because that's the reality of our costs. So at the moment, I think we're going up from 1,800 towards 2,000. So that's taking us from 3,600 up towards 4,000 again. So that's our lived reality. So just trying to get into that a little bit. When this was a diagram, it may be a little bit difficult to understand, but I think it's fascinating. Hopefully, if I can take you through this. So basically what these shapes show, the vases, if you like, they show the difference between people that are well off at the top and people that are not so well off at the bottom. And the width of it shows the proportion of that community that are represented in that cohort. So if we look here at Aberdeen City, it's no surprise that there's a big bulge at the top, which is all the very rich oil people are in Aberdeen. It's in the middle, and then there's a bit of poverty. Whereas in Aberdeenshire, once you get out of the city, that poverty bit disappears because there's nobody with no money living in the countryside, basically, in Aberdeenshire. If you go to Glasgow City, very different picture. So if you look at Orkney, we're here, very much like a flying saucer. So we're kind of squeezed in the middle. We haven't got that many really well-off people. We don't have the same poverty as some areas. And I've just circled Shetland and the Western Isles so you can see similar patterns there. But that shows the diversity of economic circumstances that there are in each of the places that make up Scotland. And so that graph that I showed beforehand takes place against the backdrop of all that diversity. You look at all the ways that communities are made up, and we're very different. And even within Orkney, the communities differentiate between the major towns and the countryside and out to the outer isles as well. So we need to think about all of that diversity. Now, faced with the challenge of energy transition, very often this is couched in terms of how much it costs. And indeed, again, in this last month or so, there's been a lot of discussion about how best to achieve energy or cheap energy. Yeah, and we're told, just forget renewables and go for oil and gas. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that oil and gas is in itself not cheap at the moment, and it comes with other issues. And this work that we did as part of the Reflex project shows what our future looks like if we do business as usual, because we're spending money every month on energy. And we think that on average, in terms of the energy, it was 6,500 on that for the actual fuel. But when you buy fuel, you have to buy a car, you have to have appliances that use the energy, and you have to invest in that. And when you put those technology investments in, a household in Orkney spends somewhere between £10,000 and £15,000 a year on its energy each year. Multiply that by 10,000 homes, and it comes to £150 million. Look at that over 10 years. It's a lot of money, 1.5 billion. We've got businesses as well that are spending on that. So in our existing existence, if you look forward at that over 20 years, just as we are, we would spend £5 billion in Orkney on energy and things that use energy. It's a phenomenal amount of money. But we are actually there. This isn't what might happen. This is what is happening. So if we want to do something different, we can go to an accelerated transition. And what that means is that we have to buy technology up front, which allows us then to reduce the carbon footprint and reduce the demand going forward. So it pushes the bubble of investment forward, but then you get the dividend later on. And if you look at the maths of that, it comes out to about £3 billion. So we can save 40% of our energy costs over the next 20 years by going for an early transition. So those are some thoughts to hopefully stimulate ideas in your own mind. They're not to guide anybody. If somebody's got a different opinion, absolutely come forward with it. If you've got something that reinforces that, or you want to talk about something totally different, then please do that. And I'll just hand over to Neil.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Rich, indeed. So, a few questions really. Let's start off with the easy one, which is so why do you come up here in the first place?
Well, I mean, the first reason, of course, Neil, sorry, I'm just going to move up.
Yeah, thank you.
Safety leadership there.
The
The first reason, of course, is to fulfill a promise I made to you in a pub in Mayfair in 2021. So, yeah, there's that. But there is The first one is to learn, right? And I'll couch that in the fact that as a renewables evangelist and have been for a long time, I think for those of us who are in that world, we picture this vision of what we just saw when everyone raised their hands a few moments ago, and we imagine that at a national level. And of course, that's quite a long way away. But there's something that's happening here and now, which is just a huge bellwether to what the future could be. And there's something that we can all learn for that. Learn not only in terms of what you're doing well, but what's been hard along the way. And what we can sort of take from those lessons and sort of put around the country. And I think there's something quite inspiring about that in and of itself. Now, and there's a set of islands here that, and the UK is a set of islands. It's just a bigger one, and therefore all of the dynamics that you referred to before, we can read across into that. And it might be a very hopeful and maybe slightly naive vision, but it's certainly the one that I cling on to as an advocate for the energy transition and for trying to make a cleaner world, but also one which puts people right at the heart of it. And I was talking to Ian before about this idea that instead of customers in the world of energy being at the end of a long chain and being passive, of being in the middle of an energy system and being participants in it. And I think you're doing that here, and the people in this room are doing that, and that's something that we in GB Energy want to learn from, because our local power plan is very much based on the vision that you can try and take this and build thousands of these types of local community energy schemes and put the ownership into the hands of people around the country. And then the third reason really is that we are very much in startup phase. I've been doing this job a year as of last week.
Tell us more about GB Energy as well.
So I'll tell. Yeah, okay. So for those of you who are new to Great British Energy, we were set up by the government as part of a manifesto commitment to set up a publicly owned clean energy company. And I think the principle behind that is, this is a big societal, economic and industrial transition is going to happen around the country. We have seen industrial transitions happen across Britain before, and they haven't always been well managed. There haven't always been interventions. I'm from Merseyside. I grew up in the 1980s. It was a city which was going through an industrial and economic transition of its own, but it was very much left to fend for itself. And therefore, the idea of having an activist, publicly minded investor in the middle of this to give British people a stake in it, but also to intervene into the places where it was necessary to intervene, is something that speaks very powerfully to me. And I think it spoke powerfully to people in the election, because they see something in that as being public spirited and having good purpose. And maybe we'll come on to strategy a little bit more, but in a moment. But I think as we set up, we have been given a pretty big budget by the Exchequer. We're very fortunate to capitalise a startup with just over £6 billion over the course of the next 4 years. And part of it is actually part of the motivation for being here is to understand how that capital and how the businesses that we are setting up can play a role in accelerating transition in some areas, play an important role in supply chains and creating more jobs, or frankly, putting more megawatts into the hands of people. And those are the principles. And maybe you'll ask me about strategy, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. But in terms of the local power plan itself, how did that come about?
I think as we were building our strategy, one of the things that I thought quite a lot, even before I started the job, about what have publicly owned energy companies in Europe, what journeys have they been on? And if you look at them, it's Statkraft, Vattenfall, began life as hydro companies, fairly singular mission. EDF were a nuclear company. They also had a singular mission. Ørsted, a bit different, started life in oil and gas, big rapid corporate transformation into offshore wind. But they started in building deep capability in a particular area. So the question I was asking myself is, what are the areas where we're going to build deep capability to make Great British Energy last, not just as a government agency within a parliament, but a company that develops into a national champion in the way that those other companies that I've mentioned did as well. And so in our strategic plan, we look to work out where are those areas. And secondly, how do we balance the trade-offs? Because I didn't feel like we would have the luxury of just choosing one thing, because we were born out of this sort of big sort of political moment, and therefore there was a risk that, in practice, GB Energy could be lots of things to lots of people. But I wanted to be able to sort of focus in on certain areas, and we chose in offshore wind to really focus on deep water wind and something that we think is necessary for the next frontier of energy. On onshore, we really think there's a big job to do in long duration energy storage, and that's a sort of a big transitional thing that the country is going to need with a highly renewable system. And then in local energy, the key piece for me was, how do you take something which to now has been typified, and I think I'm speaking at a national level here, not necessarily specific to Orkney, but at a national level, has been typified by the endeavour of people to do something often against the will of the wider system, and turn that into something that is simplified, standard, and much more normal. Some people can just sort of somehow pick this off the shelf. And the vision within the local power plan is, yes, we talk about building capability and capacity and networks of people who can support you as communities to try and do this. But then once you've started the process, the journey of developing a project, have easy access to technology, easy access to people who know how to build things, service things, provide warranties. And that helps you then get easier access to finance. And if you can package all that up in a singular platform, then maybe we've got a chance. And we've set a really ambitious target to build 1,000 community energy schemes. I thought it was ambitious until I came to Orkney and learned that you've got 780 onshore wind turbines already. That ambition over 4 years for a startup company is to say that we want to take this from being an applied energy solution in an island setting to be a much more normal right away across the country, irrespective of those particular demographics within whichever local authority.
I was thinking, Gareth, did you want to reflect on the reflex experience in that light? Because it strikes me that we tried several things, and we had some obstructions and some impediments at various places. What we've learnt from that. But one of the challenges I think I always felt we had was being able to share those lessons with others and get those lessons out there. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, as you heard earlier on, and many people in this room have been engaged with reflexes, on the cars or the charger or something as well. So it's not just the people that were delivering it; it's the people that benefited and supported it as well. And it is still, if you like, there to be a community, to live the dream really that you articulated. And I think for many of us in Orkney, when we heard about GB Energy being set up, there was a great hope, frankly, that finally somebody and something was there that was aligned with what maybe our vision was. And, obviously we're just at the beginning of that exploration, but it's brilliant that you're up here looking at that. And the fact that you're here for 3 days is already a differential from a lot of the other people that have come up for a few hours. And, so often we've had people that have come to tell us about what's happening elsewhere and then try and impose it here. But as we will discuss and as you've seen and we'll see over the next couple of days, we are living a different pathway, but the pathway we think is very much aligned with where you want to take things. So, I think the challenge, and you mentioned money, and I think, when it comes down to it, that was one of the big hurdles. There were non-technical barriers that you can solve, but we launched Reflex at the start of the Ukraine war, as Anna was saying this morning, just as Brexit was being implemented. It was the worst possible time where the supply chains disintegrated, inflation came and disrupted our whole world, and then people started to look to different solutions. And you listen to the dialogue today, and there's people kind of wanting to go back to the 60s almost. So that's a real challenge, I think, for us to be relevant and still keep that vision of going forward. But as you say, people are living the dream here, and many people in the room who are doing it.
Yeah, and you wake up screaming sometimes.
Yes.
Martin, do you want to jump in? Well, Martin, can we just use the mic, mate?
Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry. I'd like to ask about the scale of developments. It seems to me that commercial wind turbines now are sort of 4 megawatt plus. Yet that is a big hurdle for a community scheme to get over. We've got several community schemes in Orkney that were 900 kilowatt wind turbines. At some point in time, they're going to need replacing. The connection assets, the cables and lines or whatever, they've got 40 or 60 years lifetime, but the wind turbines don't. And one thing I'd like to get your point about, see what your point of view is what do you think about enabling replacement or even new wind turbines in that sort of scale that make it community friendly? For small places like Westray or Edy or
Martin, can I just clarify that? Are you suggesting further 900 kilowatt turbines? Is that's the point you're making?
Well, yes, that would make sense, but I don't think they're commercially available anymore.
Yeah.
You can, EWT do a good line in 1 megawatt turbines, and I think there's still access to them. But I think there's an important point here, because what I said earlier, access to technology is important, and the reason why I say it is because I used to work for a technology company. In fact, arguably one of the biggest, and Siemens made wind turbines, we made gas turbines, we made all sorts of different things that spin. And one of the sort of lessons from it was that when Siemens bought Bonus Energy from a Danish company in 2004. And as we started to scale the business, I joined Siemens in 2004 as well, and I got involved in sort of really looking at how to grow it in the UK. And one of the things I noticed was that the profile of the customers that we were addressing were all what we call like tier one customers, SSE, RWE, Scottish Power, who were bringing big volume business. And I remember asking someone, how do we access the customers who only want to buy 1 or 2 turbines? And the attitude in the company was, well, look, we haven't got time for that. We've got 2 salespeople over in the UK, and have you seen one of our contracts? And so I can imagine sort of even if they wanted to sell you one, they'd rock up with a 600-page MF1 contract, and you'd look at it and go, well, it's going to cost me more than the wind farm itself in legal fees to be able to negotiate this thing. So you've got to be able to provide customer-friendly solutions. So I think there's a job on us here in GB Energy or there's a role that I'm exploring and I would like to be able to take on, which is, can we be the procurement agent of community energy companies around the country, so that we go talk to Nordex, we go talk to Vestas, and we make long-term agreements with those companies, and that what you're doing is buying, a turbine from GBE that we're procuring, and hopefully through the scale that we accomplish with that, we're able to pass on better value to communities in the process. And that can apply. I mean, look, the public sector already is probably buying, tens of thousands of solar panels. It's probably buying batteries and EV chargers right away across the country through local authorities, through all sorts of different institutions. If we could scale that up and pass that benefit through, then all of a sudden that big inhibiting factor of the lack of cost competitiveness potentially of some community energy schemes be overcome, partially overcome by actually providing access to technology. And look, as I know, working in this space, it can easily become a minefield. And simply, you would go to Nordex and say, I want to buy 1 turbine, and I'll go, I'm too busy to do 1 turbine. It'll come back when you've got 30. And that's something we need. To your specific point on repowering, I'm really interested in this space, and I'm not just here to say yes to everything, but I'm interested in this space because, frankly, from a business perspective, it's really, one of the things that I could do all sorts of stuff with GB Energy, and then at the end of the Parliament, there's an election, and a new government comes along and says, well, what are you doing? How much money are you making? And one of the things that I can do to access sort of opportunities in the market at the moment is to look at repowering as assets that are generating value already, coming to the end of their life, need investment, but some companies, some of the ones I mentioned earlier, may not, find as quite as strategically important as maybe they did in the past. So I think repowering is a really important opportunity. There's loads of hurdles with it. It's arguably more complicated than just building a greenfield project. So addressing that market, finding solutions for technology, for engineering, even for lifetime extension, if we can do it, all of those things should be explored.
Mark, did you want to come in there because you're involved in the work to get those community turbines up in the first place?
Yeah, we were, and we spent the last few years. We've been actually nationally doing projects and doing events on repowering because, in the community sector, we've benefited for nearly 2 decades of having turbines up. But they are getting older, and we're facing a situation between 2035 and 2040 as the end of a community energy sector.
Yeah.
Because so many of the sites, we got the biggest turbine we could on that site, and that was a 900 kilowatt. And how do we then repower these sites? So a lot of the drive up until the last months, almost rather than years, has been looking at how we upscale, how to go to bigger sites, how do we come in. There've been certain things like NISO grid reform has really changed that quite dramatically, and we're going back and looking at what assets we had there. How much I dance around too much. EWT, we were really interested in them. I think they need to get to a point where they're bankable, and that was the issue. Scottish government supported us actually looking at these sites that have Enercon E44s on. Can we put a manifold on and change the site to put EWT on them? It doesn't really stack up at the moment. Huh? Okay, yes, okay. Ads, Neil's gesturing at me, which always worries me.
Behind,
oh, yeah, okay, that's right. I think the interesting thing, I think the market is there. We've always been pushing Enercon. Orkney, the more remote areas of Britain benefited from Enercon when they were around. They had a different business model. They actually wanted to put their turbines in the challenging sites when they started. And they were single supply. When Orkney, we were desperate to get a dozen turbines. They said, people say, we're putting up 300 in Zaragoza or 500 in California. They didn't care, but Enercon wanted to go to these sites. Mm-hmm. I think Enercon have been very reluctant to come to the table. I think they're missing out on offshore wind's a really good opportunity for us, their business model going forward. But also, they've got a huge fleet of those size of machines across Spain, across California, that have had an easy life. So I don't know how much to go on about this, but there's a lot in that space at the moment. But I welcome what you're saying. I'm trying to mind the name of the boy who in Wales, we're on a call with him, who is now for the first time offering a refurb Enercon, 3 years availability maintenance, which is interesting. There's our buts about that. I think that's going to be something we need to do. We always thought would like to make the most of these sites, but I think they will become essential. And to achieve what you want to achieve onshore and local, it's all these gaps. We have these opportunities already, existing sites and small sites. They can build out 10 gigawatt in the time before we get the first offshore turbine wet in lots of ways. So I think there's a real opportunity there. Sorry.
Just if I come back on that, just with a minor point, which is like I hear it, and I think what one of the things we will come across is dealing with these issues quite practically. And this could sound like hubristic or arrogant, and I don't want it to, but it's like I would hope that if we come with the collective backing of lots of communities around the country, and we've got the British sort of government behind us, that some companies would engage in constructive dialogue. And the other thing I would say, as working for a former manufacturer of turbines, is the business model is very much make money in service and lifetime extensions, and it's the kind of Gillette razor model. You sell it and then you have to keep coming back. And so I think there's value in lifetime extension that is probably not fully exploited yet by some manufacturers. And finally, Enercon, as a German manufacturer, and Siemens can easily be thought of, but they're actually really a Danish-Spanish manufacturer, not even though there's the German name above the door. Is the kind of Stadtwerke model in Germany. It was very much sort of driven the mentality of, yes, it's absolutely right to sell to municipal energy companies, as opposed to just thinking about what E.ON or what RWE you want, but we need to know what Langen Stadtwerke, Nuremberg Stadtwerke want, etc.
Make a comment. I can't see. There's Dennis. Dennis, you want to come in on that point? Just let you have the mic.
No, we're not. The
All right, I'll-
energy scheme. Are you still talking about community energy schemes, particularly? If so, I don't.
You need to talk into the microphone, Dennis. It doesn't work if you just wave it
Okay.
in front of you.
Okay. Well, I might be a little bit unpopular, but is there a danger that we end up living on our yesterdays? We were leaders of the pack, but I think we're dropping back down. Yeah, just one thing is, evidently we're now going to be running our ferries for the next 35 years, primarily on fossil fuels. And I don't think that's a good look, and it's not good. If we're looking at what we've got to look at from what we see in the slides there, the 85% that we're not touching at the moment. And, so I think we've got to try and see how we can get into that. I mean, politically at the moment, it's difficult because a lot of energy is not getting out of the areas. For instance, Shetland, there's big constraint costs, and it's big political. There's some politicians making big political capital that the taxpayer or the electricity power user is essentially subsidizing companies because they can't get the electricity to market. So really, the only thing around that is to sort of utilize things much better in the areas, such as Orkney. We've done a bit of that in the RPZs, but we need to look at that a lot more, and that will need, obviously, everything needs funding, but it needs political will to match what the will we've got in the community. Because that's the only way we can spread the benefit of renewables around the whole community. Is at this level by delving into the 85%.
So, Dennis, can I just pick up on that point? Because it was a talk I was talking about earlier as well, which is a lot of the stuff within the local power plan is about, as I read it, and tell me if I'm wrong, is about getting more people literally getting invested in the means of production. And there's an element there about local use. So hospitals having solar panels on to use locally, and public sector and all the rest of it. But one thing I wasn't quite sure about was this issue. If you look at a community of interest as rather than the hospital, but even the hinterland of the hospital and the people around it, there's a bit about whether there's a mechanism to better incentivize people to use more electricity, which then deals with the constraint issues to some extent, because we are then using more of our own power. And I don't know whether you see Greenwich Energy having any sort of role in that sort of space.
Well, I look, there's certainly something around the role that we can play in enabling what we've got within the plan referred to as smart local energy systems, and in some ways thinking about those big anchor customers as being the sort of the building block that gets you on that journey. So there is a role there, and I think for us as a company, from a business perspective, and I'm not a politician, I'm not but I work for a publicly owned company, but thinking of it just purely as a businessman for a second, the logical thing for us to do is to start at least in terms of building scale with some of the simpler projects, so we can build some corporate memory. But whilst we do that in parallel, start to do some targeted, more complicated projects to work out, well, okay, what do the business models look like? How do we learn from, how we've constructed the financing, how we've constructed the technology setup, et cetera, et cetera. I think the sort of maybe slightly higher level point I would make is that I don't think this is clearly not linear, and you talked about the ferries, and as a Scouser, ferries are pretty famous where we come from. They sing about them, and they've just done exactly the same on Merseyside, which is a real shame considering, like, through the carbon capture and storage initiative, HyNet is just building this huge hydrogen production facility at Ellesmere Port just down the estuary, and it's like couldn't we? Surely we could build, these things only go from here to here. Surely, and it's not like they've got to go very far. Surely we could have figured out a way to do this with a better fuel. But when you talk to the combined authority, they've listed out the barriers and the problems and the additional costs. And then I think there's often this fear of, if a diesel powered ferry could be done for 50% of the cost of a electrified or a hydrogen one, then there would be all sorts of backlash of spending that money. But there's the answer on that slide.
Yeah.
There's the answer. So actually, sometimes it's like, to your point, I mean, we're not going to get into the business of buying ferries, but what we are going to get into the business of doing is sort of addressing that 90% capital point, which is the biggest barrier often for people to really believe that 10% is real.
So could I just come on to that point and I'll bring Mark, were you signalling? I couldn't say who was it. Torkel. I'll just make a point and then bring you in, Torkel, because it does strike me that one of the potential pieces you touched on there was this bit about being able to be a little bit of a champion, because if we sound off up here at 59 degrees north, not a lot of people hear the message. But if there are other people who are facing similar sort of obstructions, like the farce of the smart meter rollout that's gone on, the way that's been difficult for so many different communities, us having somewhere where we can take some of these issues to and say, is it just us, or are other people facing this as well? Because I'm sure some of the local energy aspects are very, very small pieces of polishing and making sure the regulations fit together. That's why I'm pleased to see regulation is one of the pieces in the four targets.
And the thing is, in this room, we're all, I assume, more or less on the same side, right? But there's a point here about when we of GB Energy, and when we're sort of behind the scenes, and the questions that I get from senior civil servants and ministers about our progress, the area that they're really interested in us making progress on is this area, is on local. I mean, yes, it's lovely to be able to invest in a floating offshore wind farm, which we've done off the coast of Pentland, off the coast of Caithness, and the Pentland wind farm, and that's that's great, and it's really important because it's building an industry, and that has a different dividend. The dividend there is jobs, potentially creating an export for the future. But the bit that I think is understood by ministers, and I'm not talking about this for a political reason, it was just that it's because people find it popular. People like this. When you build energy into a community and they take control of something that previously they were, passively involved in, and now they're actively involved in, it changes the relationship between a society and its amenities, its utilities. So that's why I think it's something we've got to really jump into.
Torkel, do you want to come in there, and then Robert, and then Marty?
I'm stating the obvious in such a group of disciples, but capital's not actually our problem. I would propose we've built all these turbines already with our own capital, and there's probably more investment to be made. That the restriction is bureaucracy and the energy market. So your £6 billion is not really needed. You just need to get the legislation changed, and it will release all sorts of opportunities for cars, for the energy market. For the energy market to be more dynamic. So you've got Shetland, you've got lots of islands in Orkney throwing away power, unable to use it, and they have to buy heating oil for their houses. I mean, we all know this. Everyone in the room knows this, but we need to actually see a change. The government needs to make a change so that the power that I sell from the wind energy company that I'm involved in, and there are several shareholders in the room, we sell it at 8 pence a unit, roughly, or 8.5 pence a unit, but it's been retailed at 27 pence a unit. So, but if it was being sold for 12 pence a unit, heating oil would disappear overnight, because it would be viable to have a ground source heat pump to actually run your house. But heating oil is really cheap, and gas, most of the UK, is really cheap. So it's not really worthwhile at the present price differential.
No, look, that's understood, and the capital budget we've been given isn't to do one thing, right? It's to do multiple things. And the reason I'm setting my business up into sort of 3 market silos is very much to have, frankly, to a certain extent, a bit of competition between them, because I believe you can I think there is a role for capital in this market, because I don't think we'll be able to change regulations fast enough. Anyone who's been involved in cusk modifications will Ofgem will know that it just doesn't happen fast enough. So, my simple point is the way the capital will flow if the market works. But if the market doesn't work, and there's a leap of faith required, there's some underpinning confidence that can come from us.
Yeah.
Then that can play a role, because I do believe that you can reach those tipping points faster and cause the problem. Someone from Ofgem said to me recently, we're really interested to learn, to see the evidence from your projects so we can build the evidence base for policy change. I thought, oh, that sounds like it could take a really long time, because I could give you loads of evidence and they go, I'll have some more evidence, and I'll go and build another 50 projects and bring back more evidence. But it's like, I actually think sometimes you just got to do a bit of market making, and that requires courage. But yeah, again.
Could I just,
Gareth, and then I think Jim's got the mic, and then we'll come to Robert after that.
because that question of evidence, I think, is a really interesting point. And I am going to just say, you kind of referred to maybe the diaspora in the room being of unified voice and opinion, but actually it's a good OREF audience. And as ever, we've got quite a few different opinions and ideas in here. So even though there's a lot of people that partake in it, even that discussion takes us into places where different people have different experiences and different roles and different opinions. And I think that wider evidence base is one of the things that Orkney can really offer. And, we've been at it for 25, some might say even 50 years, if you go back to the origins of it. And going back to the way in which you can be a conduit for some of the things that are going on here, it's not just look at what they've got up, it's not the technology, it is those journeys and that evidence base.
Yeah.
And I think if we could, if you like, get the recognition for the experience that we've collectively had. And it's not one experience, it's a diversity of experiences, and that's the richness of it, because it's not a utopia, it's something that's hard won. That's maybe something that we could help with, and it would accelerate. One of the things I think is in my head is that if you end up with 100 or 200 new recruits coming into GB Energy doing local energy stuff, how long is it going to take them to build the experience that we've got here? So, can we make sure that we reach out, and a word I often use is create a collaboration rather than a corporation. And I think that's something that, we could work on together.
And to be honest, I'm being putting my business head on. I don't think I need to build the army of people to do this, because there is already an existing sort of huge, deep knowledge in the market and or in the country and in communities right the way around Britain, where they've been doing various different schemes. And it's not about replacing that. It's about sort of synthesizing it or something as well, bringing it together so that you build a layer of knowledge that is a warehouse then for that anyone can get access to.
Yeah. Okay. Jim, and
I am ex-oil industry, but I'm not your enemy.
are you speaking at this?
Yeah, I'm ex-oil industry, but not your enemy. You used two words earlier. The oil terminal in Flotta actually provided 80% of the power for Orkney many years, and also put all the infrastructure in the North and South Island.
Mm-hmm.
You used two words, easy to say, clean energy.
Mm-hmm.
What's your definition of clean energy?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, I'm not your enemy either, because I built the most recent gas-fired power station to be built in the United Kingdom. I have a career across the whole energy sector, and I basically love big machines, right? So we like big machines, don't we? Yeah. But I am an evangelist. So clean energy. Look, what's my definition of it? I suppose what I mean is zero carbon. That's what I mean. I'm not talking about a government definition here. This is just me answering you. I think it's, and we know the government policy is the clean power plan for 2030 is clean power is a 95% zero carbon system. putting that aside, for me, what I'm talking about is clean power means harnessing nature, as in the sun, the wind, the sea, the waterways, storing energy so it can be dispatched when people need it. I think that's probably it, really, isn't it? That's it. I mean, and I think in the long run, that being it's something about the availability of that around people's lives, about how people's lives work. So I do think there's a huge role for digital in the future of this, so that your life is autonomously managed for you. About your car is charged, it knows where you're going the next day. Your home is heated to the temperature that you want it to be heated, and you're not overly interacting with it. Just a word on oil and gas, if I may, which is that, look, the role that it's played in the know-how. That is, what did we do in Siemens when we built Siemens Wind? When we bought Siemens Wind Power, we spent 450 million on the 9th biggest turbine manufacturer in the world, and filled it with people who've been working in a business unit in Siemens, which was then called Fossil, right? And we put all the people who knew how to scale technology and build quality and engineer stuff really, really well, put it into that business and made it the 2nd biggest in the world. And that's what is happening right the way across the renewables industry. Is not an either or. It's not a, I remember I gave an interview when I started at RUK and said that, it was just after ScotWind and releasing round 4, and someone said, has the renewables industry made a Faustian pact with the oil and gas industry? And once I Googled Faustian pact to work out what it meant, and it was this kind of idea of selling your soul or giving away your values. The thing I realized is the response was, look, all of the companies, Ørsted was the Danish oil and natural gas company. That's what it was. RWE, they've got the 7 gigawatts of offshore wind farms to build out of this auction, also runs the biggest CCGT fleet in this country. We are all through a transition, and we better understand that, because it's the self-same skills and people that are making it happen.
I think Mark has commandeered.
Can I add here?
Go on.
How do you make and develop and bring a wind turbine to Orkney without carbon emissions? How does every generator that's behind me in Burger Hill have oil in them?
Well,
How, if you go up Burger Hill, we have 3 generations of wind turbines. So that's 3 generations of concrete in the ground that's never been removed. So if you take an oil terminal, you'll demolish it to the ground and clean up the ground. Why is it not happening with renewable energy?
It's quite a specific point there about that particular site, and I've no idea the reasons. But I think if I might say one thing which might sound a bit philosophical, the renewables industry is still relatively young. I mean, I know you've been doing things for a long time here, but actually the maturity of the sector, I mean, it's not, the oil and gas industry only had an official regulator from 2012 after the Wood Review, the Oil and Gas Authority was set up. So you basically got 5 decades of growth, and then it gets regulated. I mean, the renewables industry isn't regulated. I mean, construction is regulated. If people are breaking rules around, how you should build things, then something should be done about that. And with respect to carbon intensity of any kind of technology, I mean, the carbon intensity of technology, whatever technology it is, will decline with the carbon intensity of the grid. So one day if we've got 100% zero, or if we've got a zero carbon grid, we'll make everything with zero carbon, and we'll still need oil for lubrication. No one's got a problem with oil. We've got a problem with carbon emissions.
Burning it.
Yeah, it's burning it. That's the issue.
Robert's next. Mark's going to make a point, and then Robert is going to get his turn. So, Mark, go.
So I'm with EMEC now. I'll see you tomorrow about offshore wind, but I was heavily involved in the Reflex project. I'm going to echo a few points that were made here.
I think, as Thorkel said, it's not necessarily access to capital that's been the issue with decarbonisation. A lot of it is to do with policy and regulation not keeping pace with the ambition. And I think we saw that firsthand in Reflex, where we had access to capital and we wanted to do ambitious things, but we couldn't for various reasons, mainly to do with regulation. For example, we were going to do a wide rollout of solar and battery across homes in Orkney, but we're pushed back from the grid. The grid, basically, the DNO said the grid is full and we can't do a community-led organised rollout of these types of assets because of the constraints on the grid. Bigger grid, like transmission connection, will help alleviate local problems, but we're still going to have local issues. So another point, I guess, is around the importance of local supply and flexibility. There's a particular point, a particular regulation change that is coming through in summer this year, P441, which very much ties in with your local power plan. So it is about facilitating lower cost energy supply, where local generation is matched to local demand and therefore avoid a significant amount of the cost of supply. So it should lead to bill reduction by around 30-40%. That ties in with Dennis's point around if we incentivize more local consumption of local generation, then everybody wins essentially. So there's quite a lot in there, but I think it's mainly, it would be good to hear that you don't just have a big pot of money, you have influence over the right type of policy and regulation to allow these projects to happen that you're hopefully going to fund.
Okay, I'll give you two anecdotes quite separately, or one's more of a thought than an anecdote. Does everyone remember when they tried to land a spacecraft on a comet recently? It was about 5 years ago, and there was a video of the footage when they did it, and it crashed into the comet. And there's this famous scientist who was like thrilled. She was jumping up and down in the video. It was on "Have I Got News for You" and everything, and she was like it crashed. And when she was interviewed afterwards, it was like, we just flew a spacecraft and tried to land it on a comet. Have you any idea how ingenious and unbelievable it is that we got even close to doing it? And what you say is, well, you didn't quite make it. So I think the point on the Reflex project is you tried to land a spacecraft on a comet and it didn't quite make it. And I think actually it's a pretty amazing thing that you did. And the uptake in EV use that I saw today was like, that's a phenomenal accomplishment that's been done through the ingenuity of that project that has a legacy. So, don't focus on the negative. I think focus on the accomplishment. The other point I want to make in response to your question about influence, we shouldn't, as a publicly owned company, have undue influence on public policy, because private sector companies would rightly turn around and go, you're getting things done for you, and it shouldn't work that way. But there was a moment, and I was the chief executive of Renewable UK until a year ago, and Renewable UK, if you're not familiar with them, is a trade body that represents the wind industry, and I suppose I could have been called a lobbyist, right? And in the build up to allocation round 5, which was the year the CFD auction in which offshore wind didn't get any new projects, we spent an entire year explaining to the government that in the fallout from the Ukraine crisis, costs in the industry had gone up, and the price that they'd set for the auction was not going to work. It was clearly not going to work, and all of the evidence was that it would fail. And we went on and on and on, and we produced document after document and analysis after analysis. And the response, the government chose not to change the auction because they said it would delay it. They'd have to delay the auction by 6 months. To which we said, well, you might as well delay it because it's not going to work. On the day the results were published, the energy minister stood up in Parliament and said, we've learned really important, valuable lessons from this auction, and it's been, we inform future auctions through our lessons. And the opposition stood up and said, the industry have been telling you for a year. We knew this was going to happen. You knew this was going to happen, and you didn't do anything about it. The industry said it need higher prices, and you did nothing. To which the energy minister said, well, the industry always asks for more money. Well, which is kind of true, because it's an industry's job to ask for more money. But at the same time, on this particular point, it was so obvious it was going to fail. That actually doing nothing, that was no defence. Now, my point is that if GB Energy had existed at that point in time, would they have listened to us in a way that they wouldn't have listened to me in my old job at Renewable UK, or SSE or RWE producing lots of fancy analysis? My hope is that, and it's not just about this government or this regulator, but that for a long time, that we would speak with the credibility and the knowledge that we haven't got anything to gain. There's no profit to be made. No. It is just simply, this is the analysis, these are the facts. Would you like to act on them or not? And then it's a matter, and then it comes with credibility and integrity. And that's what I hope we can bring to the equation.
Thanks. Robert? And then I think Mark. Sandy. Martin, you've had a go. We'll jump to Eiley and then we'll get you up there.
Yeah, Robert Leslie. I'm an energy officer at Orkney Housing Association, and I'm also the candidate for the SNP in the upcoming Scottish Parliament elections. I thought I'd better just get that there. In my role as an energy officer, I've been trying to persuade the Housing Association to invest in wind for an income for a number of years, and we've not quite got there yet. So I'm right behind renewables. I've been on the floor over the years. But what I'm seeing from the point of view of folk that haven't been able, you saw the show of hands here earlier on about the ability to invest in clean green technology here. But in our HOOTIS, I go out and do the EPCs for them. We had Scottish Government funding to put in triple glazing and better U-value door, top-up lofts, etc. short ago. And I walked into it was a couple of weeks ago, and he was burning gas in a mobile heater in the middle of his house because he'd switched off his high heat retention storage heaters because he can't afford that. That's just shameful, basically, in a place like Orkney. And we're talking about electricity, trying to get folk onto electricity incentives to do that. I sit on the Scottish, it's the Rural and Island Fuel Poverty Action Group, or the housing associations and other organisations, and we've engaged with Ofgem over the last couple of years to try to make the case for lower electricity prices for storage heating, and to match the kind of tariffs that EVs have enjoyed for a wee while. That NUG octopus tariff that was out there has been taken off the market because of the volatility at the moment. So just at the point Neil referred to the mess that's been made of smart meter installations in Orkney, we're getting there now through the radio teleswitch replacement programme. But just when we've started getting tenants and households onto that snug octopus tariff, which is 9 pence for your overnight storage heating and hot water charge, it's been pulled. So until we get to that point where gas and electricity is more on par, at the moment it's between 4 and 5 times the cost of a unit of gas to pay for a unit of electricity. And what we've found is folk since 2021, the energy crisis, they've been rationing by up to 50% for the previous household usage. So we're talking about folk going cold in their homes, cold, damp homes, and that whole issue around damp and mould that have health impacts on folk. So, I think we had the carbon budget last year. The Climate Change Committee suggested reducing the cost of electricity because they see it as a blockage to decarbonisation, and that really hasn't happened yet. I know that you're talking about regulation at some point, but that really needs to change drastically for everybody benefits for that.
That's right. Can I just come back on the cheap energy question, because we have discussed that many times in OREF, and I think absolutely we need to look after the people that can't afford to pay for the energy, but within the energy system, there are people, you saw on the graph, there's people that are sitting there on £50,000 a year surpluses in their lives. And so I think whenever we've discussed it, we've kind of come back to maybe redistribution. People that can afford to pay their energy bills are going to have to go on paying their energy bills, possibly even at a higher price, so that they drive down efficiency. Because if you just drive down prices, you make energy too easy to use and too easy to waste. But you have to address the lower end of the spectrum. Is that?
It's getting there, but until gas is dearer than electricity, decarbonisation's going to be out of the reach of the money folk.
I think there's a really there's a fundamental point that we need to cut the cost of electricity in order to accelerate the energy transition, or at least make sure it doesn't get any more expensive whilst other things get more expensive, as it were, because it's hard to see. Let's look at it's one of the things that I'm really, I think we think a lot about as energy professionals, not just in GB Energy, but we need lots more electricity because our plan is to electrify the country as much as we can. So we need lots more electricity. So what are your choices? You can build gas, CCGTs. World's most efficient CCGT that you can get off the market at the moment is probably going to be about 50% more expensive than offshore wind. Domestic solar is pretty cheap. In many parts of the UK, I'm not sure what the economics look like here, but I've seen plenty of solar panels around, and I imagine longer days probably lead to some kind of evening out of load factors. So solar economics are reasonable. Onshore wind, not as good as it was 5 years ago, but it's still pretty good. And nuclear is incredibly expensive, and you don't know when it's going to get turned on. And the economics of hydro have changed because of major construction projects. There's a kind of a bit of a reality that everything is more expensive than it was before the Ukraine crisis. Everything is more expensive than it was. Inflation, cost of money. We had these benign interest rates for a decade, and it made things incredibly cheap. And they're not benign anymore, unfortunately. So there's a kind of point around, we really can't afford for electricity to get any more expensive than it currently is, because it has to be the vector that sends people to zero carbon, and actually it's the vector that sends people to more security. And the thing about gas, for me, being more expensive and making it more expensive, there's a debate about the fairness of putting levies that are on electricity and putting them onto gas. And I think that's it's got all sorts of consequences, and I think there's fuel poverty consequences that arise from it. There's consequences of putting them all on the taxpayer because, arguably, there's things that actually the electricity consumer should be paying for, and it is the most sort of progressive thing to do. But overall, they're just choices. And the cost of, if you go to Germany, the cost of a kilowatt hour of electricity out the back of an offshore wind turbine or a gas turbine or a steam turbine is pretty much the same as the cost out of one in the UK. So it gets you to, well, what's the problem then? And the problem, I think, is that we've got decades, and this isn't a political statement, decades of underinvestment because of not bad regulation, but regulation that didn't anticipate the future. They didn't fully anticipate what was going to happen. And therefore, we're having to catch up on grid investments. That's slowing things down to the extent that we'd like to go. So, there isn't a wand here we can wave. There isn't a choice of a particular electricity that we can just, we'll build loads of that and everything will be fine. It's actually continuing to pursue the policy with a certain degree of consistency, getting on with that grid build because it's frankly overdue, and making sure we can find a way to pass as much value back to the consumer as possible. And that has to be it.
Thanks, Tom. Sandy, and then Eileen, and then Martin. Right.
Hi, Sandy Kerr, what we met earlier today. First of all, I'd just like to endorse what Mark said about the need for some vehicle to lobby to, target regulations that are getting in the way. But I also wanted to reflect on you were talking about smart local energy systems earlier. The need to, the challenges are in reflex and the challenges of matching. local demand and supply. And I was involved in the Energy Rev project, and as part of that, we did a database of other community smart energy projects around the UK, and went and actually talked to a lot of them. And it was really kind of slightly interesting, slightly depressing. One, how the same mistakes getting made time after time after time, was there was no institutional learning, and there was no repository. Everybody was like learning from scratch every time. And it was a massive problem. And then when the projects finished, they tended to just disband, and the people disappeared, and it was all gone. In fact, it was often incredibly difficult to find out anything about them. But the other point about, fun point about, I think it was a kind of crash landing the lander on the Comet, and how that's a massive success in some ways. But talking to a lot of people in these local energy projects, you had a mix of people with different priorities. So you often had a technology company in there going, great, this is an opportunity to test something, this new battery or whatever. And you were also engaging households, and people were putting things in their houses that they actually thought were going to last a long time and reduce their energy bills. And, a lot of the technology didn't work, and people were left with a kind of hole in the wall and something hanging about the house. And for them, it felt like a massive failure. The technology companies had sort of learned something and moved off. And we saw this a number of times. I'm not talking about people projects, but a lot of other projects. So I just wondered if you had any sort of reflection on that. One, on this need to keep knowledge somewhere, because we just seem to keep learning things and forgetting it, and it doesn't advance. And it was a nice point you made about that almost getting there, but a lot of people can get burnt along the way, and they need protected.
Yeah, I think. I think there's a lesson in itself, basically, around making sure that if you intervene in people's homes as part of a project, that there's there's something in it for them, and B, if it doesn't materialize, then they're at least held harmless, right? And there's the first point, knowledge. I mean, I think it's odd, at least, and I'm not passing comment on anyone here, but I think it's odd that through all of the various different publicly funded schemes that we've had around the UK, that an institution like the Energy Systems Catapult has not been sort of micro learning, really actively listening to what happens in these projects, scaling things up. I think if, I'm not saying it should be the Energy Systems Catapult, but there should be an institution which is, if you're using public funds and distributing public funds, there's something that kind of says, there's like a sanity check which says, are you expecting to find one of these individual schemes that comes out with a eureka moment and goes, well, we found it, we solved it? Because if that's the hypothesis, then you probably don't need, knowledge management. But I can't believe that would have been the hypothesis when you back all sorts of different, local energy schemes. It's about building knowledge. So it's a real shame that hasn't been thought about. And I would just say is that, from my point of view, that's why in the local power plan we put in the capability and capacity, and we talk about regional, like hubs, and just making sure that we create a model which allows for some kind of aggregation of lessons learned. And they won't all be the same in different places, but collectively they'll lead you to something. And I think that's really important. I mean, it's academic thinking, but it's not rocket science, is it? Unlike putting a spacecraft on a comet.
I think we've got some interesting points to discuss around that, because quite a lot of the projects have actually got commercial companies in them, and some of them therefore can't necessarily afford to give away the learning from these projects. But similarly, I know we were quite disappointed through the Reflex project in that there wasn't even a mechanism to share our learning with the next group of people coming through with other projects. It was just,
you put safeguards around intellectual property, but I think we're kind of touching on this with some of the work that we're looking at in offshore wind, which is a very different space. But there's a real genuine point, which is that if we're going to put public money behind this, then public needs to get a dividend. Yes. And that's, it's not necessarily pounds in their pocket, but it's national intellectual property that turns into jobs in the future. That's a dividend.
So you're off mic. Sorry, whatever. Sorry, we'll move on. Eileen, I'm conscious of time as well, because it's just going up to 8:30. couldn't think. I think the volumes you're off your costs the ground.
Yeah.
The people like non-executive director Kagan Martin, she and I made on one 2013. But they're waiting. You need a way to actually be enabled to have a certificate of power.
That's all. Yeah. Okay. That's the vehicle. Yeah.
Eileen.
Yeah, we'll give you my point, Mark. So that's great. That's good. This is good. A perfect segue. Eileen, my day job was working for EMIC, so I'll see you tomorrow. But nobody said it yet. The local power plan is really exciting.
Yeah.
You know, we've been waiting a long time for something like this, but I guess the key point is we haven't been waiting. Islanders are really good at problem solving. We don't wait for other people to come and solve problems for us because we'll be waiting forever. So we are good at being resourceful and good at being stewards of our resources as well, because we have to be to survive in an island context. So my question is, what can we do now that we have this amazing opportunity to respond to your local power plan and help you deliver that plan? What's your call to action in terms of all the knowledge, the experience that's been generated in not just in this room, but in the Orkney community more widely? How do we organise ourselves? How do we respond and support you to deliver the goals of the plan?
That is a tremendous question, and you know, I think so. The point about resourcefulness and creativity, inventiveness is like come across in spades. We're one day into 3, and it come across in spades today. To be honest, like some of the things I've learned, particularly like 22,000 people generating what is effectively a trade surplus of 300% is pretty phenomenal. And, you know, you could argue there needs to be more value retained here, but it's still an incredible outcome. But also, you know, the statistics around 780 onshore wind turbines, and, you know, that's probably more than, I mean, it's probably more than the whole of England, to be honest. It's like, but so there are things like that are just brilliant. I was left with this thought, and it isn't very well developed, so I don't really know what to do with it yet. But it's like, if you wanted to try something in the world of local energy systems, where else would you go? Where else would you be the kind of, because this isn't the Scilly Isles. It's not, you know, yes, it's 22,000 people, but it's still 22,000 people. That's a lot of people. So it's not trying to do something on a street. It's doing something in a complex geographical setting with interconnectivity, with, you know, various different businesses, huge increases in demand, must be big increases in demand with the you know, in energy demand when you have a cruise ship rock up, and that changes probably the feeling on the island as well as the whole energy dynamics. So there's like loads of really knotty little issues to try and work through, and there's part of me that just thinks that we could be more than just asking you to champion stuff. We could be real partners in how we take local energy to the rest of the United Kingdom. We could be thinking a bit bigger. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think after one day, I'm kind of thinking there's something more creative we should be thinking about.
Have you got your head office in the wrong place? Just leave that for a minute.
I would answer. Of course not.
Okay. Martin.
Yeah, your aim to get more community energy schemes on the way is good, but my understanding is that everything between now and 2030, all the grid reinforcements that are planned, are already fully committed by commercial enterprises. And certainly within Orkney, we're getting a 220 kV cable put in shortly, but the amount of commercial entities that have applied to connect to that is more than its capacity. And yet when you speak to SSEN, they say that there is no plan for the period 2030 to 2035 to put in a second cable. So we finish up with a situation where we can do all we can with anything we've already got a connection for between now and 2030, and some of it will spill over because connections do. But we then have a 5-year hiatus where we can't do any community energy projects. And I understand that that applies to basically the whole of the SSEN area, what used to be the hydroelectric area. And are you aware of that? And
well, it's a regulated industry. So the first thing to say is there's a regulated industry with price control frameworks that sit over 5-year periods. So that is a constraint that the whole industry the networks industry has to deal with. They plan for 5 years. They get their capital approved by Ofgem for 5 years. It's either there or it isn't. And I think, look, this can sound really bad, but it's like, it's good it's happening. It's good that it's happening, and it's a step change. Looking longer term, I think there's a question about demand as well as supply. What do you? It's not one thing. You can't just continue exponentially indefinitely growing supply without thinking about where does demand live. And why are there loads of aluminium smelters on Iceland? Well, because there's sort of infinite electricity that comes through geothermal. So it's like, if there is infinite supply of electricity in Orkney, which of course there isn't, but if there were a huge abundance because of wind and sun, and because you've got a really smart local energy system, then there's a question about what you should be doing on demand. What could be here that isn't here today, and how could that grow the economy? I think that's a question that should be explored.
Yeah, we don't have the capacity to supply all the anticipated loads that's coming up anyway.
But you presume your cable is to export.
Well, the cable that's been installed, it'll be bi-directional like all cables are.
But the big job it's going to do is to be.
But it will increase the secure supply capacity in Orkney by a little bit, but not by enough to allow us to do all the things that we want to do. So a big chunk of it will disappear in ship-to-shore supply for Hatston.
And there is a piece here about us being able to articulate our vision to help those planning things happen. So the thing that boils my blood is the fact that we're just building this single cable, even though we've got 2 bores out to take potentially 2 cables out to stay at one end, and the substation that's big enough for 2 circuits. We've only put 1 cable between them. They didn't even put a second set of ducts in for a second cable.
Yes. This happens all the time in other spaces. But it's on your list. Yeah. That's not my job. To be really clear, that's not my job to take, but it's something that I do think.
Yeah. This is a representation point. So. Right, what I'm going to do, get Gareth to sort of wind things up, and I'll say a few words at the end.
For really building off, and you think we planned it really, we've gone through all the different parts of the energy supply chain and the issues that we have in Orkney and how we manage electricity, how we look at demand, and that's a quite circular argument. I think it's really encouraging. It's highly for asking the question so directly and getting such a direct response, because that gives us something to work to. And just because I happen to prepare something along those lines to maybe look at what the future might hold. So, and this is really addressing why Orkney? Why are we actually here today speaking about the stuff that we're doing? And just to remind ourselves that there is no other community in the UK, possibly, maybe there are some in Europe that could have the same conversation, but there's nowhere in the UK that could have the conversation that we're having here tonight. So, thank you to all coming and listening and contributing, because yet again, it's shown what we've got here to share with people. And, that's come through the history of Orkney. There's things that have happened before in terms of self-regulation, the Orkney Act, which I think gave Orkney a little bit of responsibility about its future. And it allowed us to help create our own future. As Eileen said, we don't wait for people to come along and tell us what our future is. We try and create it. We like to do that in partnership, which is really important. And, the reason we're so passionate about it is because we feel we can accelerate things. We can help people not make the mistakes and go down the rat holes that we've all been down. And, that term that you heard earlier on about us being a lighthouse community, that's what we aim to be. We want to shine a light on the future and avoid other people coming onto the rocks and following pathways that are unsuccessful. So that idea of whatever we call it, energy innovation hub, or whatever the term is, creating something which is allowing us in the UK to go faster, smarter and greener, to where we want to go. And although we talked about the balance between regulation and money, there is clearly a financial side to that, and actually creating something like an energy transition bank. Again, this is something that we've discussed in OREF before, a mechanism that encourages capital. And I think something for all of us to bear in mind is that GB Energy isn't the only organisation that's interested in investing in energy futures. There's a whole raft of investors that are really, really interested in investing in the future of Orkney and other places. The difficulty is getting them here to hear the story. And I think that's one of the, you being an advocate for, I was up in Orkney last week, and by the way, you might go up there with your, a couple of £1 billion to actually invest in the ferries and the ports and the harbours and all the other stuff that's going on. So it's not just what you can do, it's what we can do together. So there's a lot of foundations there. And over the last 6 or 7 years, whenever we've had kind of political visitors, if you like, and I don't mean that in a bad sense, but we've tried to think it's easy to go and ask for money or technology or something like that, but there's 3 things that are really useful to us. The first, which I think we've achieved and we are achieving, is the recognition that Orkney is a place that can make a special contribution to what's going on. And appreciating that even though we're a remote island, I think we've got that worldliness that means it's not just our solutions, we can help those solutions apply to other places. What we then need is the mandate to deliver something, to contribute. Through partnership is ideal because that's your collaboration, as I talked earlier on about. We're not a corporation, we're a cooperation. That's how we survive. But to do that, and this does go back to the grid, to the regulation side, we probably need some flexibility because some of the systems that the rest of the world and the UK system works on block us from making that contribution. So I think that's maybe non-monetary asks, recognition, mandate, flexibility. If we can get that together, then it gives us a really good platform for going forward.
Right, good. Thank you, Gareth. So look, I'll just down to me to say to thank everybody for this. So I really, really appreciate you coming up to come and see what's going on. And I hope we've given you something of what you wanted, which is to just to touch this and see that it's real. So when you are in those interminable committee meetings, just hang on to the fact that there are people actually sort of cracking on anyway. We just could, if we get a bit more help, we'll get on a bit further and faster. But I really do encourage you to have a look at local power plan. There is a piece in it, and forgive if I got this wrong, about getting expressions of interest. You want to understand the things that the community want to do. That's really a part of this. So if people have got ideas or things they want to put forward, we could either help broker it through OREF, or indeed if you want to plough your own furrow, whichever way it is. But there is an open door, as I understand it, through the GB Energy team. So it's the link is on the website, and feel free to jump in and do this. I want to say thank you very much indeed to everybody who's here. Thanks to the guys for doing the technical support and doing the videoing, and also for you for coming along tonight. And I hope you found it a useful and a stimulating evening. We have another one that's going to be coming up this time next week. Goodness knows how it's come around so quickly, but there's a energy hustings going to be going on in this room, where all the candidates, certainly 5 of the 6 candidates have said they're definitely coming, and 1 is probably coming. To actually come along and hear about the Orkney Energy Manifesto, or more accurately, we want to ask them how they are going to contribute towards some of the ideas that we put forward about how to drive the energy agenda forward. So please do come along. It should be a lively and engaging event. So that's all I want to say. Did you want to?
Just, I would just like to add my thanks and an ask, if I may. My thanks to both of you, to all of you who've put this on, to OREF, and look to everybody who's come down this evening and spent a Tuesday evening listening to me, and I really appreciate it. My ask is that, look, I will take away that championing of Orkney outside of Orkney, and I think there's lots of reasons why we will do that, because there's so much inspiration we've got from today already. My ask back is that if we could start doing stuff together, that you'd be championers of Great British Energy and on Orkney, and whatever your political persuasion, just so you can come and actually see that having a state-owned energy activist investor is beneficial. But clearly, I don't ask you to do that unless you see the benefits of it. So you can hold me to that. But I would like to have a team of advocates on our side as well. So if that's okay, I'll put that ask on the table.
Thank you, Richard, for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.